now that we've created our first interactive component with variants being this next button, let's go through the process of completing a interactive component as a full slideshow. We'll do something a little bit more complex. I'm going to start with these slideshow or carousel progress indicators that are here, these circles, and I want them to sort of light up at the right indication. There should be 4 slides, for example, in the slideshow, and so these could be great as variants and components themselves. So I'm going to take this first one out and bring it, oops, I'm in the interaction prototyping mode. Let's go back to design mode. And what I wanted to do is simply bring this over to my neutral board here, and we can create different component states for this. So I'm going to turn it into a component by clicking on the create component, and then I'm going to have different states to this particular component. I'm going to add a variant where I'll have an active state to it, and then I'm also going to make sure that I have a sort of neutral state. I'll just call this one neutral or normal or whatever to that. The neutral state, I did not want the fill, so I'm going to go ahead and double click in there and change that fill color. I'm going to disconnect the style here and just bring the opacity of that down to 0 so it has no fill. And so I could animate that opacity from one state to the next as well, where we could have that fade in the different states. So this is great. I've now got an additional asset here that has an active state and a neutral state using this ellipse. So I now want to put that back into my design. I can switch into my assets there, drag that into the design, place it at where I wanted it, and I could also choose what state I want that to be in initially. I'm going to get rid of these other ellipses that were there and instead simply duplicate out this one, and I'll copy that. I could also hit Control D once I've copied it. I held down my Alt key to make that first copy, or the Option key on Mac to do that. Now I'm going to hit Control D in order to duplicate a couple more times in order to place those where I want them on the screen. It looks like I might want them just slightly further over, so I'm going to select each of them here by holding down Shift, just arrow them over into the right spots. I think right around there looks like they're pretty close to center. I can turn on Shift R, my ruler, to see where that, and it looks like the very center of that is going right through the center of them, so that's perfect. And now I know that the very first one, I actually wanted it to be in the active state because I'm starting on the first slide. So I'm going to have that indicated right there by moving that to the active state. Great. Okay, I'm going to come back over here. I am using this previous arrow right here, and I have not made that into a component. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that one. I already have a component that I could use, and it's the next arrow. What I'm going to do is drag that onto my design and simply rotate it to go the other direction. It already has the interactive pieces that I want for it. Now I'm going to line this up and put it into the right place for where I wanted that to be. That's perfect. I'll now have that arrow on the other side. I do want that to be called something different in this particular case, so I might rename this to Preve arrow in this case, so that it differentiates from the next arrow that's there. And so I can tell the difference between those, and I might even move these adjacent to each other in my layer stack so I can see them. I like to keep these things together. Okay, so now the next thing I'd like to do is actually select all of the components and imagery here that I'm going to use for my slideshow. And really that's all of this stuff. So I've got a mask on an image, and I've actually got my slides as subsequent images in the same image file. So I've got a sprite sheet of watches here, and I wouldn't have to do it this way. I could have a series of separate images that I grouped together and then sort of move into position when I wanted, but this to use this as a sprite sheet also makes sense, so I put them all into one file together. I'm going to take all of that content, move it off of my main artboard to sort of a work area over here where I can turn that into a component. So I'll just move that over here, and I'm going to turn this entire thing into a component. We'll create a component, and this is going to be for my slideshow. I'm going to make a variety of variants of that. And so I'll add a variant to this. I'm going to call that image 2 as the variant. And the very first image that's here, which is called default, I might go ahead and name that image 1 so that I know what these different ones would be. And then we could continue to create additional variants on this component. So I'll click on this to add another variant to that. I'm going to call that image 3. If you want to come back to your menu where it allows you to add variants, you can click on the root level of the component. So I can either select here or on the layer to do that, and you'll see that I have 3 different variants now. I'm going to add one more by clicking on the more options option there and adding another variant to this. So now I've got 4 variants to this. I want to make that last variant named image 4. And I'll be able to then change between the different versions of this that I want to see. So in this case, I want a different watch in these spaces. So what I'm going to do is click on my second option here. There's a couple changes I wanted to make to the progress indicators, the carousel indicators that are here. So what I'm going to do is click on those. And so I need to sort of double click in until I get the right thing. And I'm going to switch the variant to the one that I want. This is going to be the active state. And the other one adjacent to it, I'm going to switch that back to its neutral state. And then I'm going to select the pictures that are in here and move them underneath the mask. So I have a mask that's masking this out. And so I'm going to just simply move this image over. I'm going to use my arrow keys to do that and just move this image over until the next watch seems to be appropriately sort of centered into the space that I want it. And that will be now the second watch. If you're curious how I was doing the mask, if you're unfamiliar with making masks, the way that I was doing that, and I've got this other image here and I can demonstrate it there, is whatever shape you want to have as a mask. Instead of a rectangle this time, maybe I go ahead and choose, like, for example, a star. And let's say I wanted to use that as a mask. What I could do is draw that star how I want it, place it in the position I want, and then I'm going to take that star and I like to make it adjacent to the image that I'm playing with. So these are in my styles. It's called watches. I'm going to just drag that there. I got the watches and I got that star. I put it right underneath. I select both layers, and then you can simply click up here to use as mask. And you'll be able to use that shape as a mask. I'm going to undo that, Control Z. I don't necessarily want that as a mask, but that's what I'm applying in order to only see one watch at a time inside of my design here. So just a little context of why we're only seeing one watch when I have a whole series of them there. I've got that behind a rectangular mask. So if I select that here, you can see there's a mask group with the rectangle being a mask for the watches that are there. I'm going to go down to my next third variant for image 3 here and double click on that and move the using my arrow keys. I'm going to go ahead and move this into position so that I'm on my very third watch that I wanted to see there. I'll put that into the right spot, and then of course I need to update my progress indicator sort of buttons or indicators that are here, and I'm going to switch these to the right state. So this one right there is now the third one. That's going to be the active state. The first one that was there, I want to make sure that's in the neutral state. And so I'm going to change these. And of course, what I'm doing with these is changing these. I'm actually just changing like the position property of the image that's there. And that will allow me to animate that into position as well. So if we're using the same layer names across each of our component states, and we're each of the variants, for example, have the same names that are here, that's really important. You maintain that sort of same naming convention, and that we just change properties of these objects. Those properties will then be animatable so that we can actually do a smart animation to the next thing. That means that this watch, for example, will slide into place once we make it interactive. So I'll go ahead and put that into the right position and arrow that to the right spot. Then I'll change the indicator buttons here to their right positions. Let's see, I clicked too far in there and I need to just get to the state. There we go. That's going to be neutral. And then I'm going to select the active state for that. I now have 4 different variants here to represent the 4 slides that I wanted in my slideshow. And this is a component. I could name this component as well. If you want to double click, you can name the component. I'll call it my slideshow component. And it's got the 4 different images that are in there. In order to make this interactive now, I'll go into my prototyping mode and I'll select the things that I want to use to make interactive. So I do want this next arrow button to be the interactive element that brings me to the next component state. So what I'll do is on the plus, simply drag that down to the component state that I wanted it to go to. So I want to make sure that I get the right spot, that I don't end up clicking over here. I want to make sure I go to the right component state. There it is. And I will have on tap, so when I tap that particular button, I'm going to have it change to image 2. And the animation that I want there is going to be a smart animate animation so that it will slide into place. I like the default timing of 300 for that. That's about the timing I'd like for that slideshow animation. So I'm going to leave that there. Now I could then dial in my next state, or if I wanted to just test that that first button is working, I could certainly do that. I could add my slideshow is now an asset. So I'm going to go back to the design mode. There's the slideshow asset. I could bring that into my design here, and I should at least be able to test that very first interaction that was a part of this. So I'll line this up to make sure that that's kind of in the spot that I wanted it, and I'd be able to add this component into any of my artboards or frames within Figma that I wanted. So I could reuse that element in other places. That's one of the great things about components, is I can reuse it in other places, and if I edit the main component, any instance of that I'm using in another frame would update. So I'm going to then test this out just to make sure. Sometimes I like to have a little iterative testing to make sure I got this sort of working as I'd expect, at least for that very first one. And so if I click on this arrow, you'll see that the next image should slide into place, and we could see that that's true right there. And I got a little animation to make that happen. So that is working. Let's go back to the slideshow in our prototyping mode to add some additional functionality to this. The other thing that I really would like to do is, if I click on the progress indicators themselves, I'd also like them to go to the right place. And so in this case, the second indicator here really should take me to, and I want to make sure I'm getting the right one, right? So this ellipse should take me to the that second image variant as well. So I'm going to also say that if I tap on that indicator, it's also going to bring me to image 2. It's also going to smart animate, and it will remember the last settings that we had for this, so it gets faster. Once we set this up initially, if we're using those same settings, we don't have to change those things. So that button will also work. Okay, so I can start to really just wire this up now. So I want to be a little bit careful that I click in the right spots, that I have the thing that I want. I click on the plus. I make sure that I don't link it to the wrong thing. You can see all these other things going on here where it might accidentally link to. I want to make sure I'm linking it to the right spot. So on tap, changing to image 3, so that next button will bring us down to the very next image. That's exactly what I want with that. I'm going to go ahead and click on this one right here. Make sure that from image 3, I can then navigate to image 4 on that change, and I should be getting this working. The very last one of these, I want to then go back to the original image variant. So that one is going to link me back to this very first variant. When I tap that one, it's going to bring me back to image 1. Let's make sure that this is all wiring and working inside of our prototype. I'm going to hit present again and make sure that I should be able to click through to each subsequent image here. I can click to progress one to the next slide inside of this. And it looks like this one is doing something a little bit weird in that it went backwards on me right there. So something got a little bit messed up on that one where it returned back to the wrong place. So I might want to go back into my prototype for this, take a look at the wiring that's happening inside of my slideshow. It does look to me like it's supposed to progress it to the next one, but you never know. You can always come on here. I've had a little bit of difficulty with this at times where it does seem to sort of wire up a little bit oddly. I could always remove that interaction here. So what I'm going to do is remove that particular interaction. You'll see that that arrow has a variant interaction where it will change to the pressed state, but it also has a tap interaction where it's supposed to progress to image 4. And so I'm going to remove that particular interaction and sort of rewire that up to make sure that it is doing what I expect, that this next arrow should go to image 4. In that particular case, on tap, change to image 4. That's exactly what I want. Make sure that we're going to the right place with that. Okay, so these different interactions should be correct. Let's double check that inside of our slideshow by clicking on the present mode to take a look at how our slideshow is presenting and seeing if that actual functionality is working here. So I can click to progress to the next one, and for whatever reason there's a little bug in this where it's going backwards, even though I think I've wired it up correctly. So interactive components are a relatively new feature in Figma, and I have found them to be a little bit buggy. So even though you might feel like you set it up correctly, if it's not working correctly, one thing that you can do is go to your component and remove all the interactions and start again. So like if you can remove all the interactions, you might be able to then rewire this up. And so even though I don't feel like I made an error, there was almost like a cached issue there where it seemed to be going to the wrong spot. So I'm going to now rewire each of these buttons to go to the subsequent image that's here, and then let's go ahead, and this is partly why I test along the way. I want to make sure that things are working, and then finally this last one is going to go back up to this very first frame. So I think I now have all the interactions that I wanted, where each of these goes down to the subsequent object and then goes back up. Let's go ahead and test that within the just test this out here and see what it looks like inside of there and see if each of these are now working one to the next. And there we go. It's going across the sequence here, getting our slideshow. I could now work on the interactions that go the other way. So I'm going to go ahead and click on these buttons to go the other way. So if I'm on this end, that's going to go all the way down to the very last of these. And I could double check the interactions here. Smart Animate, going to image 4, exactly what I want. This one actually is going to go back up to frame 1. This one's going to take us back up to this frame. And then this one, this button right here is going to take us back up to this frame. And I can test all those interactions as well. The other thing I wanted to do was wire up each of these progress indicators. And so I can do this the exact same way, where I click on the indicator, drag it down to the frame that I want it to go. And so I'm going to do that for each of these, where I get to the indicator and drag it to the place where I want it to go. And so each of those should work at this point. And I could do these other indicators as well, making sure that I get the right thing selected and where I want it to go inside of the design. Then I'll go to this one, make sure that that indicator goes to the right place. This one goes to image 2. This one is going to go down to image 4. And then right here, this one is going to go up to image 1 or variant 1. This one goes to variant 2, image 2, and this one goes to image 3. So this should be fully wired up now in terms of all of it, and we can certainly validate that it's working inside of our test window here. So we'll play it out and make sure that our interactive slideshow is fully functional. So I should be able to go frame to frame here all the way across. I should be able to do the back frames, and I should be able to use the progress indicators as well as a way of clicking to the varying places. So I did get this finally wired up, seemingly working effectively. So that's a demonstration of how we can use interactive components to create an animated carousel, an interactive carousel. In the next video, I'll work on creating an interactive drop menu using interactive components.